Hello everybody. So today we are doing a review of all diatonic triads and all of their inversions. So at this point we've gotten to basically every diatonic possibility. So we're going to go ahead and take a look at these with all of their inversions so you kind of remember how solfege works for each of these. And then we'll also talk a little bit about sequence review before ending with a single harmonic dictation. You've done a lot already this week through your gamut practice, so we're just going to do one today. So here is kind of a chart. Hopefully my window doesn't block you off there. Here is a chart of all possible diatonic chords and their inversions with an asterisk. There's a couple exceptions here in the minor that we'll get to in a moment. But in any case, I would remember both for your melodic purposes for singing as well as for your harmonic purposes that I would try to remember each of the solfege for each of these chords. It'll really help you figure out what's happening in your bass. Because remember, what happens in the right hand is generally unimportant in terms of figuring out your inversion. Now, there's some exceptions, like typically a first inversion chord, right? Typically, a first inversion chord when you have a bass will not have the third anywhere but the bass. You'll have perhaps root, fifth, root, and then the third in the bass, because typically it's seen as too strong. Now, not that this always happens this way. There's plenty of instances in repertoire where you do have a doubled mi, so to speak, but in any case. So, looking at the bass here, we've got, of course, do, mi, sol for our tonic triad. We've got re, fa, and la for our 2-chord. Okay, for our supertonic chord. Remember that re, fa, and la is tremendously close to fa, la, and do, right? So 2 and 4 are close. Really, you're listening for the difference between hearing that re is what distinguishes your predominant chord in that case. 3, remember that we don't see very often. 3 is mi, sol, ti. So you're listening for what a minor triad that seems like a tonic chord, but with that T at the top. So this kind of sound. And so on. 5 chord, we know 5, like the back of our hand, sol, ti, re, right? Remember that our 6th chord is also very close to our 1 chord, but it's got la in it, right? That's the big difference. 6 either happens as a predominant chord, so it usually happens before a 2 chord, for instance, or it happens as a deceptive cadence, and so on. 7 is very similar to a 5 chord if it were a 7th chord. So remember that a 7th chord for 5 is sol, ti, re, fa. Right? So a 7th chord, a 7 diminished, is like a 5-7 without its root. Right? Very subtle difference, but important, because you do see 7 diminished triads in the wild. Okay? Now, for minor, all of this stays basically the same. The sound is altered, right? Because remember, our chord quality shift. So 2 becomes diminished. So if here's 1, 2 becomes diminished, right? Okay. Can be a little bit tricky to navigate. 3 becomes major, as we've talked about, right? So does 6, right? So 6 can also get kind of tricky. 4 becomes minor. 5, we almost always have the raised T. So solfege-wise is the exact same thing. 7 is the exact same thing because also that raised T. Okay, and so on. Some considerations to keep in mind. Remember that 2, 5, and 7 frequently have 7th chords. So remember that for our figured bass, 1, our root position is nothing. Our first inversion is 6, okay? Our second inversion is 6-4, okay? For our 2, 5, and 7, for our 2 chord, we can add on a do to that, right? For our 5 chord, we can add on our fa, as I've mentioned. For our 7 chord, in major, we can have a half diminished 7 sound, so something kind of like this, right? Remember that in minor, our 2 chord becomes half diminished. So our 2 chord becomes this. And our 7 chord, when it has a 7th in minor, becomes fully diminished. Right? So, We'll go over sevenths in a future lecture. In fact, next week we're going to come back to sevenths. But yeah, remember that 2, 5, and 7 very frequently have an extra note to them. Now, remember also that 1, 6, 4 is kind of a tricky one. 6/4 chords in general are far less common than their root position and their first inversion counterparts, but a 1/6/4 is most often a part of a cadential 5/6/4. So remember, if we see something like this, where we've got sol, do, mi, right? That really is acting almost as a double suspension over 5. Okay, and so on. So something to keep in mind. And also remember, we haven't talked about this explicitly yet, but our discussion of sequences kind of leads us to this point. The only chords that we haven't covered explicitly in major or in minor are the minor 5 and the major 7 in a minor key, right? So it's our 5 and our 7 if we don't raise te up to T. You will never see either of these chords in their normal functional places. A minor 5 is not a substitute for a dominant 5, okay? What happens is that these chords can become predominant chords, typically as part of sequences, okay? So, remember that we talked about sequences last time. A sequence is a progression that follows a regular intervallic pattern in terms of its root motion, right? So we have, say, a descending fifths sequence where you could look at either chord to chord, is like you're descending a fifth every time, or you've got a you've got this kind of oh my god, I'm blanking on what the inversions are. We'll get to it in a second. But in any case, sequences are regular recurring intervallic patterns. We covered them last week for the first time, so if you're still uncertain of them after this video, I would definitely revisit last Friday's video as well. So we'll see minor 5 and major 7 in an example I'm about to show you, but they don't really happen that often, so we're not going to really belabor the point. The chords you see on screen are our most common, most frequently encountered chords, the chords that you should be responsible for knowing, and also not just knowing their solfege, but also remembering their function. We've talked about their function a lot, how 3 typically precedes a 6, which precedes a 2, precedes a 5, and so on, that kind of thing. So remember that chart that we've referred to at previous points in the quarter, where it's got the brackets and the arrows and so on. Okay, so here's an example of a sequence that is a minor sequence that does in fact have our minor 7 there. Okay, so we've got a descending fifth sequence, right, where every other chord is alternating a first inversion chord, right? So we start off, instead of with a 1 chord, we start off with a 1/6. Okay, and so on. So, what book I've taken this from, notice, this really kind of helps us out here. Notice that they've tied over the notes that remain the same in between. It really helps show you kind of how these sequences unfold through good voice leading, okay? So, here we go. This sequence, for instance, okay, alternates, it's descending fifths, and each one alternates first inversion triads. Okay, so notice that the 7 is also major, kind of tricky. We've also got 3 in there. The way that you identify these chords in this context, because 7 and 3 do not have functions that stick out like other chords that we have. Look at your intervallic pattern. Look at your right hand and your left hand. Right? Once you hear the pattern of how your voices are proceeding, that makes the harmony just a means of taking the voices that you have and figuring out what those chords are. Because functionally, while the chords here happen to link up, especially at the end with their 6, 2, 5, 1, in a way that we've seen in other progressions, in this case, the sequence is really doing all of the work. What's driving things here is not necessarily the harmony so much as the voice leading, right? right? Every two chords is basically the same pattern repeated over and over and over again. Okay, so something to keep track of. Okay, so we talked about sequences a lot last week. I don't want to spend that much more time on sequences. And again, this whole week of harmony is basically just a review of things that we've seen already. And like I said, you will not really see 7 or 5 in the wild unless they're in a situation exactly like this. And you won't ever see them unless it's a minor key, because the distinction between 7 and 5 only happens in minor. Okay? So let's go ahead and end the video today by doing a harmonic dictation. All right? So here we go. 10 chords. I'm going to give you 6 listens. Now, expect a sequence of some kind. I will not be quizzing you on what type of sequence it is, okay? But when I say expect a sequence, I mean expect a regular kind of intervallic pattern and expect kind of your voices to follow relatively systematically, okay? So here we go. We are in the key of B flat major. Okay? Now, the right hand gets a little wonky for me, as I'll explain. So whenever it's split into octaves like this, I'm just going to play them on a single pitch, okay? This isn't going to be as confusing as it seems. So here we go. Your first notes are written out like this. Okay? Ready? Listen, 1 of 6. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so let's listen 1 of 6. Go ahead and take 30 seconds to figure things out. This is quite a long progression. We haven't had progressions quite this long before. So go ahead and take some time. I will roll 1 or 2 of the inner listens. Okay, so take 15 seconds. Okay, so listen 2 of 6. Here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so for listen 3 and 4, your 2 middle listens, I'm going to roll every chord for you. Okay, so here we go. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4. So go ahead and take 15 seconds or so. Okay, so listen 4. I'm going to roll the chords again. Hopefully this is helpful and not confusing. Notice that because of how part doublings work, we have several spots where it kind of splits off here. Remember that for your dictation purposes, you're only responsible for bass and soprano. Okay. However, the inner voices help give you basically all of your information for the harmony. Okay, so they're still important to listen for, if not to necessarily dictate directly. So here we go. Okay, listen 4 of 6. 1, 2, ready, go. Hopefully the vacuum cleaner that my roommate has decided to use is not bleeding over into the microphone, so I apologize. Take another 15 seconds. We are 2/3 of the way there. Listen 5 and 6 will be regular, played regularly, quarterly. So 2 listens remain, about 15 seconds. Okay, here we go. 5 of 6. 1, 2, 3, 4. My oh my. Okay, well, one final listen. One final listen. Here we go. Ready? 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, yeah, go ahead and take 15 seconds. Finish up your thoughts. Okay, so I realize now that I have been playing 8 chords, and I didn't update that on the PowerPoint. So here we go. Let's talk about this example. Okay, so it is a sequence. Okay, what kind of sequence is it? Okay, we've got a descending thirds sequence that alternates first inversion. If you remember this from last week, this is the 5/6 pattern, right, where we alternate between root position triads and first inversion triads, okay? What I forgot to mention is that I had cut off these last two because they just seemed pointless, but I didn't update that in the PowerPoint. So I apologize if there was some confusion there. I only played 8 chords every time, not 10 chords. But in any case, you still got the full amount of listens that you were deserved. Now, notice that we have this this pattern that reoccurs, okay? I'm going to play just the bass and the soprano right now. Okay, this is where it resets, right? It resets at the very end, okay, because we end on a 1-6, so then we just then have a cadence 1-5-1, okay? So the biggest difficulties, I think, is in that fourth measure, where you do have those patterns switch off. But in any case, hopefully this wasn't too bad for you. Now, the reason why I changed the right hand so much is because I just can't play it. It's too wide. We've got 11ths in the right hand, so it goes from here to here. It's too big for my hand. I can reach a 10th, but not an 11th, okay? So I had to condense it into one hand like this. Okay, so that was why I did things that way. So apologize for any confusion there. But in any case, sequences in action. Notice that we've got, start up by going from 1, 5, 6, to regular 6. Not to regular 6, pardon me, to the chord 6, okay? That's kind of a clue that we've got some sort of sequence going on here, because 1, 5, 6 is kind of an odd way to start your phrase, this kind of deceptive sounding quality to it. You've got a 3. Remember that 3 chords typically appear in harmonic sequences. And notice that we've got this kind of groups of 2 forming, as noticed by the brackets. So we've got 1 to 5, then we've got 6 to 3, then we've got 4 to 1. And if you look at this in another way, you've got 1, 5, 6, 3, 4, and then 1 again. Okay, and so on. Then we just reset and then have a authentic cadence at the end, an imperfect authentic cadence. So, sorry, there's just a lot to keep track of for these, and it can be easy to kind of over-explain things. So if you have any questions on sequences or have any questions on anything that we covered today, as always, feel free to email me if you have any outside help that you'd like to look at. That's all we're going to do for harmonic today. You've had tons of harmonic practice this week because of the McGambit module, so I'm not going to do any more than that. Let's go ahead and take a look at what we're doing next week. So we're moving on to chapter 14. Next week's going to be another rhythm-heavy week. We'll spend another week with rhythm, and then our final week, week 9, we'll spend time doing kind of what we did this week, is applying our pitch and melody to those rhythms. In harmony land, we're doing non-dominant sevenths. And I say non-dominant, but I also mean non-dominant and non-2. So 1 major 7, 3 7, 6 7, and 4 major 7. We haven't had major 7 chords yet. These chords happen infrequently, but they do happen. They're kind of harmonic embellishments, so to speak. They don't function with the same sort of way as a 5-7 or a 2-7, where you see those all the time. These are a little bit more rare. Your homework for this weekend is posted to GotchaSpace right now. It's due this Monday, May 18th at 8 a.m. to my email, so make sure you get that in on time. So that's it for this week. If you have any questions, as always, please contact me. And if not, then I will see all of you next time.